Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin, and I got the coffee ready, so let's get started. Today, I'm excited for my conversation. My guest today is a good friend of mine, Cecil Phillip. Cecil, do you want to say hello? Introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. So Isaac, first of all, I want to say I'm a fan of the show. I'm not gonna lie. Like I've watched some of your previous episodes.
Thanks,
I
buddy.
saw you had Kelsey on. I saw tons of other folks you had on. So I just want to say thank you for having me on because I really appreciate us finally getting the chance to catch up because it's
Yeah.
been a little while actually since you and
Yeah.
I have had a moment to talk for a little bit.
I was trying to think of the last time I actually saw you in person because obviously nobody's seen anybody in person for like the last
Oh
two
man.
years. So backstory for folks who may not know. So Kelsey, wow, Cecil and I used to work at Microsoft together, and I think the last time I saw you in person was at a Microsoft internal conference in Seattle.
Yeah.
Probably 3 years ago.
Yep. I think
So
you're right. I think you're right.
So I'm not going to expose where Cecil lives, but we live on the opposite ends of the country.
Mm.
So if we're in the same area, usually we're gonna be saying hi to each other. So again, but I wanted to thank you for being on. Yeah, I think you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing these days.
Yeah, sure. So for folks that don't know me, I've been a .NET developer for the majority of my career. Yes, I do know other languages. I don't only know C sharp, but like primarily like I've built like my whole career on .NET, right? Like building microservices, web APIs, working with MVC and way back in the day when we had web forms working with that, right? So I've spent a lot of time in that web space. Um, over time I've had the opportunity to like teach a lot of people. I've taught classes on software development in C sharp. I've done podcasts and tons of other really cool things. And somewhere along the way, someone was like, "Hey, do you want to do that? And like we'll pay you for it." And I was just like,
Sure.
What are you talking about? Like, is this a thing?" And so now for like the past, I want to say 5 years now, 6 years now, I've been a developer advocate. Previously, I was at Microsoft, and this is where Isaac and I met each other. And now I'm a developer advocate at Stripe. Still focused on .NET, just very specifically now we're talking about .NET and how do we plug payments and payment processing and some of those types of things inside of your applications.
That's awesome. I mean, it's funny you mentioned like that. Oh, you're gonna pay me for this thing that I enjoy to do. Like it's one of those kind of pinch me things. And whenever I talk to folks that are in the advocacy space, right, it's about like that creative energy, right?
Yeah.
Like always needing to create content. I'd love to ask you too, kind of about your origin story about with tech, and you can talk about open source or .NET or whatever. But like, do you remember
Yeah.
the point in time when you came across tech and you're just like, this is it. This is the thing I'm doing. I need to do this the rest of my life. Obviously, if I make money, that's great, but like I just have to be attached to this sort of stuff.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Antigua, so I'm an island boy, born and raised. Lived there until I was like 19 or so.
We're not gonna do the
And
song, right?
no, we're not doing any songs. Um, the reason why that's important is because like when I was growing up, this whole thing about like computers in the house and
Yep.
in the classroom, like that wasn't normal for us. I think for my peers, like people my age in other countries, that was normal, but for us, it wasn't. Actually, it wasn't until I left the country when my high school was like, "Oh, hey, we're gonna open a computer lab," and I'm just like, "Now you want to do it? Now then I'm leaving you to add
Yeah.
computers to the thing." So anyway, because of what my dad did for a living, he had to write a lot of reports, and so I
Sure.
grew up watching him on a typewriter, like he's clicking away on a typewriter. And at one point, he was like, "Yo, this typewriter thing is not working out." So he went and got a computer. And what he got was, and let me know if you remember this. I'm going to date myself. He got a compact Presario. I don't
Oh,
remember the model number, but this is when compact was there.
yeah.
I don't remember who bought them. I think HP might have bought them eventually, but it was compact Presario. And I always tell people, this is whenever you bought a computer, it came with everything.
Yep.
So you bought a computer, it came with the monitor, it came with the mouse, the keyboard, even came with a printer. It came with everything in a box.
Yep.
And then you open the box, you plug everything in, and then you're good to go, right? And so as you can imagine, just like most children are, like I'm curious because there's a toy and I want to play with it. And my father was like, "If you touch this, I'll kill you." So what
Sure.
happened was,
Yep.
I used to get up really late at night to quote unquote go to the bathroom, and I'd like find my way into the room and like turn on the computer and start messing around with it. And then what you'll notice over time is like I became better than my dad did at the machine, right? Um, and so again, over time, I was just kind of like I'm just getting more and more curious. I want to learn how this thing works. And one summer, I opened up a set of books because again, when you bought computers, they came with books, right? One of those books was about HTML. So I read this HTML book, and it's one of those things where like you put your name like on the screen, right?
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
think it was like H tag. Like my first HTML thing was like an H1 tag or something. But for me, in that moment, I was like amazed, right? Because that is the first time I've actually ever created anything on the
Yeah.
machine. Like
Sure.
I'd played games on it. I played Solitaire and Minesweeper and all those types of things, but I'd never actually created something. And so in that moment, I was like, this is fascinating. Like, what else can I create? And so, taking that story and kind of going through college and even my professional career, now I'm always just very like excited about like creating and learning new things and trying to understand like what are my limitations and like how can I break the wall, right? How can I
Sure.
break the ceiling beyond that limitation and take it a little further?
Yeah, it's funny. Like my first computer was a HP Pavilion. Same thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
we went to Walmart, we did the layaway thing, and then like literally had to like truck like on a hand truck like
Yeah.
18,000 boxes because everything was huge
Yeah.
back then, right?
Mm-hmm.
And day two, uh, my dad made the poor choice to put the computer in my room, so I took the
Yeah.
whole thing apart. And he's looking at me and he's like, "You better put this back together now." And I had no idea what I was doing. I took the side off. I was taking the RAM out. I was messing with the hard drive, and I had to figure out how to put it back together, like without the internet.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, I realized like this computer thing is cool. And then obviously I got into like web stuff, like most. I know, you and I are of a similar age, so like
Yeah.
building HTML sites. I built like a I was big into this the movie Gone in 60 Seconds, so I built like a website in honor of like the 60 Shelby Mustang
Yeah.
with like horrible
Yeah.
colors and like horrible JavaScript.
Did you have
Yeah.
scrolling marquees going across the
Oh,
top?
oh yeah. Yeah, no, I like no, I'm a professional MySpace page destroyer. Like I'll crash the browser with a MySpace page.
Oh my god.
It's so funny like how in when I have these conversations with folks, there's always like this light switch, right? Even if you're like, if tech was introduced to you later in time,
Mm.
like it always ends up being this thing where it triggers in your head, like this is cool, I want to do this. Like
Yeah.
a lot of people don't have the luxury of like being able to do the things they love and make money at the same time. So I
Yeah.
feel like super fortunate. I feel like you're probably in the same boat. Um, but like, what was the next thing? Like, you're living in the Caribbean. You got a computer. Like, what was next? Like, obviously, you don't live in the Caribbean anymore. You live close,
No,
but yeah,
I don't. I
yeah,
don't. I visit, but I definitely don't live
yeah,
there. Um, so so now at that point, I gotta go to college, right? Like so
yep,
we're making a decision, like what's happening. And me going to college means that I'm gonna leave now. I'm gonna go to another country and we're gonna try and figure it out.
yep.
Um, I'll tell you something that I haven't told a lot of people. Originally, I wanted to be a psychologist. Right?
Oh,
That
uh
was that
oh.
was my original thing because I
We
always had this thing about trying to understand how people's
sure,
mind work, like understanding like the thought process and like how do people's brains formulate thoughts. Like I was
sure.
always interested in that. And so I told my dad, I'm like, hey, this is what I want to do. Now, if ever anyone that's watching is from the Caribbean, like they could validate this. You can't go to Caribbean parents, at least back at that point, and tell them you want to be a psychologist because you'll be labeled the crazy person doctor, right?
Oh,
And
sure. Okay.
your family does not want to have the crazy person doctor in the house, right? Because
All
if you're
right.
the crazy person doctor, that means that you must be crazy too. Again,
Ah, all
this
right.
is this
No,
is the 90s in the Caribbean, right? Like I'm
sure,
not saying
sure,
it's like this today, but we all have our stereotypes and things about our cultures that are a little different.
sure.
This is kind of how people thought. So my dad was like, nah, we're not doing that, right? Like, well, this computer thing is kind of cool, let me try that, right? Like that is the
Okay.
other thing I really like to do. So we did that. And now when I think about like the influence of the types of people that are around me, because at this point we'd had the computer in the house for a couple of years, and the only other person that I knew that worked with computers was the guy that would come and fix the printer because
Sure.
the printer broke like multiple times, right? He had to come fix the printer. And so when I'm watching to this guy work, every time he comes to the house, I'm sitting right next to him and I'm watching him like plug cables in, and he had
Sure.
like the
Yeah, yeah,
compressed
yeah.
air and he's doing whatever he's doing. And I'd ask him a lot of questions, right? And I'd ask him his perspective on like computing in general, and what
Sure.
does he think was going on. And he was a young dude, like he was like 18, you know what I mean? Like he wasn't like, he's a pretty young guy. And so my thought about like what being in computers meant was, oh, I'm going to fix computers. Like that's what I'm going
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
going to
yeah.
come, I'm going to plug in cables, and I'm going to run wires, and I'm going to fix computers.
Hmm.
But then now I go to college, and one of the things that I always tell folks, outside of like the money you pay for college, if you go to college out of state or out of country, like one of the things that you get is perspective,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because now you're in a different environment and you're around different types of people and you're learning different things. And so the perspective, or one of the things that really lit up for me was, oh, this computer thing is bigger than like plugging in cables and fixing printers. Like you
Hmm.
could do so much more. And so career fairs would happen, and then we had EA Sports and Microsoft was there, and HP, Nvidia was there, Netflix was coming around at the time, and they're hiring a bunch of college folks. And I was just like, oh, so you mean I could go here, like work with
Yeah.
these people
Yeah.
and do these things?
Sure.
I didn't know that. So like now my light bulb goes off. I'm like, oh, okay. I don't have to plug in cables. I could like write code and I could make things. Just like I put my name on the screen. Like I
Yeah.
could put my name on the screen on everybody's computer, not just
Yeah.
my own, right? Like
Yeah.
we could do something different. And so now I kind of just went down that journey of trying to understand, like, again, like I had a ceiling, and my ceiling was like, okay, I'm gonna plug in cables and fix machines.
Hmm.
And my perspective like broke the ceiling, right? Like I went past that, and now I'm like, okay, now we could do something different. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so now again, I worked at Microsoft for a couple of years. That was great. You know what I mean? I've worked in stock trading, I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in tons of different industries, doing the thing that I never thought that I was going to do.
Sure.
Like it was never the plan, but it just kind of ended up, kind of being the way that it is.
Yeah. Well, it shows you, right? Like, you were put in a couple of positions where this was something, it presented itself and it chose you, right? Like I am of the belief that like our destiny, like it will find us. Like I know that's some corny thing to say, but like it's very true. Like you could, even people that are joining tech later in life, like I think that they just might not have had the opportunity for tech to present itself in a way that was interesting to them. But if you're
Yeah.
interested in tech, like that community around tech, like you're either super interested in it or you're not. And if you are interested in it, like you gravitate towards things you're interested in, right? But I also
Yeah.
think it's funny because you and I didn't realize this, are like probably very, very similar people. I didn't think about psychology as a major, but I am always been that person that hyper analyzes people,
Mm.
like always, like I'm always kind of like not reading people, but hearing what they say and trying to figure out like what their intentions are and all that sort of stuff. So like that's interesting that you had an interest in psychology. I also was that creepy kid who like hung around people who were working on computers all the time. Like there was like the dude at my school who would come and like fix
Yeah.
the network, and I would just go and sit with him like in the network room, like asking him random questions. And he was like a younger guy. Like he would always talk about he played what was like the MMO game before World of Warcraft. What was it called?
Was it
Ev-
StarCraft? Was
no,
it StarCraft?
no, that's like an RPG, like the MMO ones. EverQuest, I think is what it's called.
EverQuest. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
So
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
he would talk to me about EverQuest, and I'm like, I don't know what any of this stuff is, but it sounds cool. But I'm more interested in like knowing like what you're doing with this computer stuff, and like he's like
Yeah.
doing weird stuff in like Windows 95 or 98, and like like making sure like printer settings are working or whatever. But it was just like to that point, like I was just very curious. So like the only person that I knew who knew about computers, I would just bother them constantly. So that's interesting that you and I have like the same sort of path. Weird, man. Weird.
Yeah, but I mean, again, if you think about like thinking patterns, right? Like people I find that are natural problem solvers, people that like to like deconstruct things and put them back
Yeah.
together. And again, we don't have to be talking about like, I don't know, you taking apart your mom's toaster or the radio,
Sure.
but just
Yeah.
anything, right? Like whether you're
Yep.
talking about something psychological or physical, if you have it in your brain pattern to like try and deconstruct problems and try and understand like how the individual components work and how can I reconstitute them in a way that's more efficient, how it works
Yep.
in a really interesting way. I think a path like computer science like would definitely make sense for you. Is one of the
Yeah.
paths that would make sense for you.
Yeah, it's like an analytic, like you if you have the analytical gene or the analytical thing in your brain, like you're going
Yeah.
to gravitate towards anything that's analytical, right? Um, we got a question in the chat from our friend Scott Addy.
Oh, what's going on, Scott?
Scott wants to know what's the most exciting thing you've worked on in your career. Like I know that's a super loaded question because
That's a hard question.
Scott's probably hoping it's something you and him worked on together. But
I'll it's hard to pick one. I'll give you two examples. So I used to work at this company called Ultimate Software.
Best name
Long
ever.
time ago. Best name ever. It's actually one of the companies that I really wanted to go work for because at the time it was like the number 9 best company to work at in the United States.
Oh,
And
okay.
it was like down the street from where I lived. So I'm like, okay, that's the target, you know what I mean?
Sure.
For me. And while I was there, I got pulled off to work on this project where essentially, so the company was made up of a whole bunch of like little services. I'm gonna try and like make this like super digestible. We had a whole bunch of little services, and we wanted to be able to very quickly like spin up and spin down services and have them register with each other.
Yep.
And then from a developer perspective, we wanted it to be very very easy to discover those services. Now, I'm gonna say this to you. This is like now 2012.
I'm saying like there's tools for this now, but yeah, keep going.
This is 2012. This is
Sure,
pre-Docker and pre-Kubernetes and pre-service discovery and all these other things that we have patterns for now. But this was a thing that we're trying to solve, right? And so we created this thing called, I literally think it was called like App Server or something like that.
Okay.
And essentially it had like a centralized node, which it did centralized configuration, tracing, service discovery, all kinds of stuff. And now we wrote it in a way that, as you spin up your new service, like it connected to the central hub, you know what I mean? And then now like you'll pull rules out and you'll dynamically like run rules remotely and stuff like that. Anyway, one of the reasons why that was really interesting for me was one, it was the first time that I got pulled off to work on a project where I had full autonomy, where it was like, we're going to put you, 2 other developers, and a BA in a room. No one's going to bother you. And I want you guys to go build something to fix this problem. And so it was amazing, right? Like we went in this room and we were in here just like cranking out code and, you know how software goes, right? The design changes. Oh, let's like delete this whole thing. We're going to build it over. And, we had full autonomy to do a lot of things. The reason why that was such an important project for me was because, one, I feel like I learned so much when it came to, one, leading a project. Because at this point in time, this is like the first time I've ever really done something that substantial. Leading a project and then working with other teammates to try and figure out, how do we make decisions, right? Because now this is not a coding problem so much so as it is a business problem that we have to make business decisions as developers and try to figure out, well, what's the path that we're going to take and what's the thing that we're going to do. So for me, that was super exciting. And I think at that point too, like I built some, I have some of the best relationships from my perspective that I've ever built in my software development career, because again, we got locked in a room and they threw her the key and they're like, oh, go build this thing and let us know.
Well, I mean, you created Kubernetes. That's pretty cool.
I mean, when you look back in time, I was just like, yo, you look back in time, you're like, oh, yo, that was console, or that was, a reverse proxy or whatever the case is. Like all these, load balancing and all these things that we, like you said, there's tools that just do it now. But in that moment, we didn't have a thing. We kind of just, we're building stuff from scratch.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
That's awesome.
The last one that I would tell you that I'm very fond of, and I would tell you it's probably like the project that I've done at Microsoft that has gotten like the least amount of attention. But it was my personal favorite project. And that was when it was myself, Scott Hanselman, and we got two of the folks from Channel 9, and we went to the Dominican Republic for the Caribbean Developers Conference. And we went down there with a camera crew and we recorded maybe like 12 videos talking about like how technology is influencing and affecting the people of the Dominican Republic. So now this wasn't like a marketing video, but this was legit us going and talking to people saying how, things like AI and bots and, ASP.NET are helping people discover diseases in plants and helping save crops, how we're helping people get good information about medical care and insurance. Like it is literally saving lives of people in this very small country. And it was important for me to do that. One, as a Caribbean person, to one show, because we have people in America have this perspective of Caribbean people. All we do is like drink rum and party, right? Um, and so it's important for me to go down and show that different perspective of the real people that are there, the real work that's happening, and the real problems that technology isn't solving, right? Like we're not a, it's not a big country or company. It's not like Europe or Australia or New York or anything like that. But regardless of how small it is, technology can have such a profound influence on an economy. Again, we're talking life and death here, right? Like, because you can imagine if your crops go and you have no health insurance, and you know what I mean, like all these things fail, that's a big problem, right? Like
Yeah.
that's really substantial. So it was really good to be able to go down and tell that story. So that's definitely one of my favorite projects for sure that I got to work on.
That's awesome. Like, I mean, it's a shame that that wasn't amplified as much as it could. Like, I mean, while you were talking, I just kind of was trying to Google search, like, hey, like, how can I find these videos? Because I'd love to watch them. And I can't find them. And it's a flippin' bummer, man. But I will say, like, there's this, which is an interview that you did talking about the story behind Caribbean Developers Conference. And I think that that's definitely worth a watch
Yeah.
because, to your point, like a lot of folks think about technology as it matters to the United States, but technology is helping all sorts of different folks from all sorts of different countries and backgrounds to be able to do things that are really, really important. So, like,
Yeah.
you talk about, technology in Africa to purify water. It's not specifically software related, but this is like technology helping folks live a better life. And I think at the end of the day, like if we can amplify those stories, that's so much more interesting, at least to me, than hey, like this bank, we were able to, cut costs by 15% because we went to containers or like some other like thing like that. I mean, that is far more like the human side of things in tech is like really, really interesting to me. Hence kind of why I have this show because I like talking to people about tech. But um,
Yeah, it's
oh,
it's like
cool.
if you yeah, I went ahead and posted that link to
Yep,
the
cool.
playlist. So folks can go ahead and check that out if they want to. But
Please do. Please
kind
do.
of piggybacking on what you said, right? Like I always believe like the purpose of software is for like the betterment of people.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And so it's kind of hard to write software if you don't understand the people that you're writing it for. You know what I mean? If you're writing a game, like who are you writing this for? You know what I mean?
Yep.
If I'm writing Madden 2022,
Sure.
I'm probably writing it for people that like football or people that are
Yeah.
getting, maybe it's your first Madden. Maybe you're just getting into football, but at the end of the day, you like football. I'm writing this game for you. What are the kind of things you want to do in this game? Right? If I'm writing an app for project managers to better organize their thoughts and their tickets and whatever the case is, well, how do you think? And like, what are the patterns and practices and what's your workflow look like? Right? You know what I mean? Because if I don't talk to you and if I don't have that understanding of like, what are the things that you need to be successful, then it really doesn't serve a purpose. Like, it's like, what's the point? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think a part of like, again, kind of like you're saying, like a part of the story is one, sure, like there's a technical aspect of it, but it's also psychologically speaking, like how does technology affect us, right? And how does it help us become better? How does it help us learn better? How does it help us connect with each other? But then also too, what are the bad things that it does too, right? Because obviously there's a good and there's a bad side of like over, you know, over complicating some things that we do in our lives today.
Yeah. It's so crazy that there is a hyper focus not on the people. And I wonder if that's intentional or not intentional. At least when you have conversations in the tech community, it's all about the people. Like
Yeah.
developers want to hear about what other developers are doing, not like some random entity is doing something, right? It's always about like what's Cecil working on? What's Isaac working on? What's our friends in chat like Scott and Trezzy talking about, right? Like it's those sort of things that really really are interesting because it also has like a level it makes things relatable. That's why I think things like Twitch are so interesting for like live coding and
Yeah.
so in demos and stuff like that, because at the end of the day, I like seeing people fail on live stream trying to do something, because I fail all day when I'm writing code, and it just makes things substantially more. And already use the word approachable or relatable, but that's what it means to me, right? Like, I would love to get your thoughts on, as somebody who creates content for a living, good, bad, or indifferent,
Mm.
like what is like how what when you're building a piece of content or a content plan, like what sort of things do you think about?
It's kind of like what I said just now. Like it's like
Yeah,
who's it for? You know,
yeah,
like who am I doing this for? And I'll be honest with you. Sometimes it's a little selfish. Sometimes it's for me, right?
sure, sure,
Because we've heard the stories about, hey, I did a video or I wrote a blog post or I put a thing on GitHub because I don't want to forget it. You know what I mean? Like these are like my notes, and I'm just assuming if me as a person who has been developing for X amount of years in this platform, in this language with these tools, if I have this problem, maybe you might have the same problem too. So maybe I want to share that knowledge or share that perspective with you. You know what I mean? And then now when you go out and you share that, you know what you might get? You might get thank yous, you might get some boos, you might get some people that say
yeah,
to you, you know what? I tried that and that works for like these cases, but it doesn't work for those cases. But you know what happens now is that you have a conversation. And now, through that conversation, now you have a relationship, right? You have a
yeah,
relationship with a person or a group of people that might have like differences of opinions or the same opinion or whatever the case is, because you did something and you just decided to share it. Not
yeah,
because you're being paid for it, not because you are trying to, become internet famous or something like that, but
sure,
just
sure.
because I had a problem. This is how I solved it. How would you solve it? Right. That's what's for me, like some of the good reasons to leverage the internet are for.
Yeah,
Um, some of the other things I think about too, like in not just about like who is it for, but like why would they want to do this? Like why is this a good idea? Because I think a lot of the times we show tech demos, and I'm sure you've seen it too, where someone goes on stage or on video and they show a demo, and then you're like, I would never write an application that does that.
sure,
Like
sure,
what is the point? Or I
yeah,
would never, I would never do it this way or that way or whatever the case is. And sometimes that's unavoidable
mm-hmm,
because if you're showing something, you don't want to overcomplicate the situation.
yeah,
But at the same time, too, if I'm doing it for the purpose of presentation, right, and
mm-hmm,
not just for notes, I'm doing it to present to you.
yep,
Then I have to think about, well, what's the best way I'm going to be able to appeal to you?
yeah,
Again, like who are you, and like why do you want to do this? You know what I mean? So as an example, like I've had the opportunity and the privilege to travel, you know different parts of the world to present things. You know what I mean? I can have the same demo, but I might present it to people in London differently than I present it to people in South Africa than people in Toronto,
sure,
because like the context is different, right? Like maybe the things that are happening in that economy are different. Maybe the things that they care about are different. You
mm-hmm,
know what I mean? Maybe there's more, you know, Python developers in South Africa than they are in South America.
sure,
Maybe not. I don't know, right? But like you go and you do a little bit of research, you kind of find out what do these people care about? Like what's the thing that's going to help you connect with them?
yes,
And the
yes,
reason that's important now too is because they realize now you're not just like regurgitating stuff
mm-hmm,
to them, but you actually took the time out and you took the efforts to actually try and connect to them on a level that they can understand.
yeah,
You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know, maybe you're in New Orleans this month, you might do a thing about, Mardi Gras, because that's the thing that they do. It's obviously the thing that they care about. You know what I mean? If you go to Antigua around like, July, August, maybe we have Carnival. Maybe you might do an app around Carnival. How can I organize my events? How can I use Stripe and like collect money from these events that we're throwing?
sure, yeah,
Maybe that's the thing. But you see like that expression you got on your face just now. You're just
yeah,
like, oh, I could see that, right? Like that is what we want people in the audience to do, right? We want
yep,
them to smile. We want them to feel that connection of, oh wow, you really thought about me. Oh, that's funny. That's cool. That's interesting. I would pay attention to that. You know what I mean? Versus me coming on your show and talking to you about taxes for 2 hours. See, but
I
you see
want to
what
hear.
I'm saying, right? Like
But
it's
maybe
different.
I,
Like you
but
don't, you
may,
don't really care about that
but
though.
Cecil, you might not know me well enough. I might want to hear about taxes for 2 hours and
You want
listen
us
to
to
you
talk about taxes? We can talk about
and
taxes.
listen to you be miserable for 2 hours.
But you see what I'm saying? Though? So I think as you're whoever you are and whatever you're
Yeah,
creating, whether you're paid for it or not, there's always a reason, right? Like there's always a, like, who's it for? Why am I doing it? What am I getting out of it? What are
Yeah.
you getting out of it? You know what I mean? Because again, it's, there's some implicit relationship there. And, are we doing it for the right reasons?
Yeah. No, I that's all super spot on. And I think as somebody, you can probably relate to this as somebody who create content. I create content for my job too. It's like there's this balancing act between too easy, too hard, vaporware, consumable content. Is it approachable? Is it relatable? Is it like without assumptions? We were talking a little bit before the stream started about the assumptions that some folks in tech have about, oh, you should just know how to do this if you're in the community or if you follow me on Twitter or TikTok or Instagram or whatever, right? And I
Yeah.
think the real good content and the great content creators that build that content, they come in with the feeling like you were saying, know the audience, understand the audience, and deliver in a really relatable and genuine way. 'Cause I say this all the time at my job, like developers, like they just want you to be authentic because developers can smell the bullshit like nobody's business, right?
Yeah.
Like they'll watch you do a demo and they're like, yeah, that demo like doesn't I would never write, like you said, I would never do anything like that in a demo, or write, I would never write code in my day-to-day life. And sure, like some
Yeah.
demos are specifically made to show off some feature that might be fringe or whatever, but I think
Mhm.
that your point about like showing examples of things that people are actually going to use, and
Yeah.
it's extremely challenging. Like, I mean, you worked at Microsoft, I worked at Microsoft. Like, I used to always say, like, Microsoft does two types of demos great. It does the hello world demo, and it does the demo that's too complicated to understand. And that's great. But in the
Yeah.
middle is where everybody lives. So like when I go out to conferences or if I speak at events, like it's about like how can I put together like a little vignette, a little demo that speaks to a particular use case in a really approachable way. Like,
Yeah.
and obviously in this world, like if your code's not on GitHub, like it doesn't exist. So like everything has to be on GitHub. But at the end of the day, it's about making sure people are coming along for the story because that's all we really do. We just tell stories about technology. And at the end of the day, if we can't tell that story effectively in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, 8 hours if it's a workshop, we're failing. And everybody who's in that room isn't getting anything out of it. And that's all I really want is people, like you said,
Yeah.
people nodding their heads, people smiling, people wanting to go out to your repo, people lining up for questions afterwards. Like that's the game. That's in that
Yeah.
like I don't care about followers. I mean I do, but I don't. I mean I really do care about followers, but I don't. But you know what I mean, right?
But what you said there, I think that's really important is, a lot of times that we talk about this technology thing, and we look at it as something that's very binary, right? Like it's something that's,
Yeah.
like we're looking at the matrix, you know what I mean? Like in
Yeah.
some way. But we don't often talk about like the creative energy that kind of goes into it. And like I never really thought of myself as a technical person.
Sure.
To be honest with you. I mean, that's what people say to
Yeah.
me and refer to us as.
Sure.
But like, I always just looked at myself as someone that just likes to solve problems and
Yeah.
someone to try to find creative ways to solve those problems. You know what I mean? And sometimes I'm not even trying to solve a problem. Sometimes I just like tinkering around and trying new things out and seeing what happens. You know what I mean? And I think for you to be able to do that, like there's a certain level of creative energy that you have to have, right? Like there's some natural curiosity, natural artistic brainwaves,
Yeah.
you know what I mean,
Yeah.
you have clicking to help you take a step back and look at the world differently
Mm-hmm.
to solve whatever problem is that you're trying to solve or create the thing that you're trying to create. And for me, that's when like true technologists shine, right? Like when you can bridge the world of the binary and like that world of creative energy, and you put those two things together, I think at that point we can create something that's like really unique and special. But
Yeah.
I think that's a hard thing to teach though. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Kind of going back to like I told I'm gonna diverge a little bit. I told
Sure.
somebody the other day, um, if you look at some of the best basketball players in the world, right? Like they practice every day.
Mm-hmm.
Every day. They get paid millions and millions of dollars and they practice every day,
Yeah.
right? Because they want to be the best at what they do, and They want to find creative ways to solve their problem. When the problem they're trying to solve is like, I want to win. That's
Yeah.
the problem. How do I solve that? And I have to ask the question, well, us as technologists, like how often do you practice, right? Like how often
Yeah.
do you put in the effort to kind of just sit down and tinker and try new things and play around without it having to be like for a paycheck
Yep.
or for money or whatever the case is. And I'm not saying you have to, you know what I mean?
No,
Now, not
not at all.
everyone has to be in the NBA, right?
Yeah.
But if it's something that you love and something you tell me that you care about, you know what I mean? Like what level of effort do you put into, you know, getting better and like doing the things that you say you love to do, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the NBA analogy or professional athlete analogy in general is really interesting for me because, I mean, I don't know if you're on TikTok, but like, I'll see TikToks of like NBA players practicing, and they'll take 1,000 shots before a game,
Mhm.
right? So, like, to be a professional athlete, not only do you need to have like the physical gifts there's like 0.0000001% of the human population has, right? You also need to be able to have a tireless work ethic and always want to be evolving and bettering you are at that particular things that you just can do naturally. So like that to me is extremely interesting because the psychology of that is like, oh, like you take LeBron or Kobe or any great NBA player, right? And for
Mhm.
folks who don't care about basketball, those are two very good basketball players. Well, Kobe was a very good basketball player.
Yeah.
Um, the to like if somebody's constantly saying that you're the best or you're the greatest or whatever, right? For you to wake up every morning and still have that same drive to beat everybody when everybody's already calling you the best, that's something that literally no one else other than what there's what 100 people like or there's like what 300 people in the NBA or something like that, 90 people in the
Yeah.
NBA or whatever it is,
Mhm.
12 times 32 or whatever. Um, but like there's only that amount of people that can play basketball at the same rate and never be happy with their results. And like even think like even scaling out more like the Olympics. Like you have to work your tail off to run for 10 to 15 seconds every 4 years.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like professional athletes and I want to bring this back to being like a software developer, right? How many times have you had to like write a red black tree for your job, right?
Never.
I joke with this all the time. But
Never.
you're asked to solve problems constantly.
Yeah.
So, like, most of the very complex computer science problems have already been solved by people that are way smarter than me. And I think it's my responsibility to take all of that knowledge and implement to solve problems. And I think it's crazy to me how people think you have to be some sort of like algorithmic genius or you need to know all this math to be good with to be a good developer. It's like no, you just need to be able to solve problems, and solving problems might be yeah you know stuff, but also you know how to find stuff. You know when you know the abilities that you have. Like hey, I'm not gonna be able to figure this out. I got to go ask a question on Stack Overflow or ask on Twitter or whatever, right? Like
Mhm.
you need to have all that awareness, which I think you know a lot of people just assume that you just know the answer to everything. I mean, the interview process at most tech jobs assume that you know everything, even though you'll probably never know anything about what you're trying to implement, right?
Yeah. Here's another example I like to use. So most folks in tech companies, you have your quarterly, you know, biannual reviews, right? And I'll be honest with you, I've been in many situations where, you know, folks are just like, "Oh, you did great. You did great." No feedback? Nope, you did great. And so if people are constantly telling you you did great all the time, there's some people that would look at that and be like, "Okay, I'm okay with that." Right? And I've settled for that, and that's fine. For me, I'm not saying you have to be like me, but for me, I look at that and I'm like, well, that's not enough because I haven't taken your job yet. You know what I mean? That's
Yep.
that's how that's how I look at it. I don't say that to them because you know I like to tell people I'm low key competitive. Like I'll be competitive in my head.
Sure.
I won't be disrespectful to you, and I don't think about people in a disrespectful way. But I'm like, okay, you know what I mean? I am never satisfied with just being okay. That's just
Yeah.
not how my
Yeah.
energy is. So like, you know, looking at the NBA, like we're talking about, there's some people that ride the bench, and there's
Yeah.
some people that play 48 minutes of the entire game. You know what I mean? And you got to kind of decide like, what do you want to be? Like, what position do you want to play? You know what I mean? I don't like the bench. The bench is cold. You know what I mean? I don't want to do that. You know what I
No,
mean? So
no.
you got to decide like in your life, whatever makes you happy and whatever balance makes you comfortable, that's what you should do. But then again, that kind of goes back into our conversation about like the psychology of it.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like what part of this industry derives pleasure in your brain? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like what part of that makes you happy, makes you feel fulfilled and satisfied? Because I know for me, as much as I love to work, I also love leaving work
yeah,
because I have a child at home that I love to spend time with more than I like being at work.
sure.
So, it's like how do you find balance and happiness? You know what I mean? When we kind of look at all of the things that kind of constitute what make up your day or your week or like your existence. You know what I mean? How do we balance that? And how do we find a way that we could do well and excel in all of those areas without having to sacrifice too much on either side?
Yeah, well, it's this whole thought of like, what does a successful life mean, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like we all have a time limit. Like, sorry, everybody, spoiler alert, you're gonna die. Like,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, like, what at the when it's all said and done, like, do you want to be? Oh, well, I guess my life was okay. No, like you said, I want to have that feeling of I lived a fulfilled life and I brought value to some people, family, friends, whatever. Work
Yeah.
is a part of that. Family is a part of that. So for some people, the balance is skewed one way or the other, depending on what your makeup and what your situation is. But if you work in an environment that makes you frustrated to the point where you take it out on family, not ideal. At the same time, if you have a family situation or a friend situation where you get frustrated and you take that out in your work, like
Yeah.
these are unhealthy situations that you hopefully can remove yourself from. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about what you said particularly is that like it's that balance. And like I don't think anybody has figured out like the most effective balance because it's different for everybody. But I know
Mhm.
me, like I have sometimes I'm good with work life balance sometimes. Other weeks I'm terrible at it. I also like I take stuff home, I bring stuff to work. It's
Yeah.
it's one of those things where you're never going to perfect it and you're always evolving. Otherwise, like you're just going to be that guy who's like 65 and he's just bummed out because he didn't do the things he wanted to do and maybe didn't make enough money. Maybe the girl he had a crush on, like he didn't make that step and she went and married someone else. Like, you don't want to live
Yeah.
you live your life full of regrets. That's the number one thing.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that too. I'm just looking in the chat right now, and Trezzy Code says, "No one told me that joining the stream meant I was gonna have to face mortality."
Spoiler alert. I mean,
Sorry,
who
buddy.
knows? Maybe in the next
That's
20
funny.
years, like they'll figure out a way to freeze everybody. I don't think that's the thing, but maybe who knows? I know some
You never know.
celebrities. I know some celebrities got frozen. Maybe they'll be thawed out in like the next 100 years. But anyway, like one thing too that I would love to get your thoughts on is like
Mhm.
you, in my opinion, and I talked to you a little bit about stream before the stream started. It's like your delivery mechanism and the way that you talk to folks is so approachable. And I keep on saying the word approachable because I have terrible vocabulary. Um, but I think at the end of the day, like you do this great job of bringing everybody in at the same level, which is extremely important for anything, right? Like, is that something that you just have always had that, or is that a skill that you had to build? Like this, like, you know, being equitable, being equatable, being whatever, right? Is that something you've always just been thinking of?
I think when I look at my journey to becoming an advocate and to being in a position where I could, now people will listen to me when I share information. I had to go through things to like get to that point.
Yeah.
And sometimes good and bad things. So I remember being fresh out of college and being super curious about topic X, right? Entity framework just came out. Oh, what is this thing? Like, I don't have to use SQL. I don't have to use these APIs anymore. I could use another thing. Or MVC just came out. Like, how do I use these things? And I remember being that person that was super curious, and then my coworkers looking at me like, "Dude, like, chill out. Let's go home. It's 5 o'clock." You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
they're right. Like that's their balance. But then I know what it felt like to not have anyone to talk to, if that makes sense. And I know what it felt like to not have anyone listen to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think a part of earlier on, like a large part of my um, progression was just like learning to listen to people, because then when you listen to people, then you get a better understanding of what they really want. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when I say listen, like not just the words that they're saying, but like exactly like what,
Hmm.
like again, going back to the psychology, like the emotion that's coming out behind of it. Because you might be like, oh, Cecil, I'm hungry, but I might look at you and be like, yo, Isaac's in a bad mood. Like something else is happening. You
Sure.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
He just ate like a whole cow. Like he's still going at it. Like he cannot still be hurt. But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like how can I listen to people to really understand what exactly is that they need? And I think over time too, also if you have children, uh, I think having children and ask a lot of questions, you learn to develop
Yeah.
patience.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And then also to, I've been in a position where I've had to ask, and I've been in a position that I've been able to share,
Sure.
right? So again, before I was an advocate, like I used to, my first job, after I was a couple years in, like I had the position to teach, some of the development teams how certain things were done.
Yeah.
Because again, I was super curious and no one wanted to talk to me. So when I talked to someone else, I figured it out. And now when they were ready, I was already past that. Like I was on some other stuff. But now I could come back and I could talk to them in a way that wasn't like available to me when I wanted to talk about it. You know what I mean?
I
So
just,
it's one, just having the empathy to really understand like what it feels like to not have stuff, because then you know how to give
yeah.
people it in a way that they could digest it and they understand it.
Yeah. I have a hard time believing nobody, like there's people that don't want to talk to you, man. Like I'm sorry. Like that's some corny thing to say, but
I mean,
I can't anyway, I can't imagine. Maybe old Cecil, maybe like Cecil back in the day, maybe he's a little bit shyer, maybe he was
I
angry.
mean,
Was old Cecil like really angry like all the time? Just like listen to me, darn it. Like no.
no, I don't think it was. I don't think I've ever been an angry person.
Sure.
I could tell you, I'm a little bit more aggressive now than I used to be.
Mm,
People used to be like, "Oh, you're really quiet and you just sit in the corner. You don't talk to
yeah.
anybody." But I think a part of that too, and that was true. But I think a part of that too is I've always taken the approach to, when I walk into an environment, like I want to observe and I want to
Yeah.
listen. I want to understand. Like I want to know what I'm working with before I just jump in and I start like, you know, demanding and yelling things out. I don't demand and yell things out in
Yeah.
general, but like you want to understand your environment before you start to like
Sure.
turn knobs and like, pull plugs out. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean?
Yeah, and you mentioned that you're a competitive person, right? Like, I think in general, competitive people tend to be on the more aggressive side, just because there is that, like, hey, I'm competing. If I'm not competing against somebody else, I'm competing against myself or whatever it is. Some people, they, um, their structure of competitiveness is a bit different, but at least in my experience, I'm a competitive person too, like too competitive. So I tend to get aggressive or abrasive all the time. And it's one of those things where I've always told people, like, if I come off as aggressive or pushy, I'm sorry, I'm working on it, but
Yeah.
don't take it in like I'm not enjoying this conversation or whatever. Like I actually enjoy like that level of frustration. I don't know if you feel the same way, because it's like the uncomfortableness is like where you grow. Like, when you're working out, like, you always like, oh, I'm sore. Like the sore means that you did the right
Yeah.
thing. If you're too sore, that's a different problem. But like
Yeah.
it's about that, and I'm rambling a bit, but I think
No, I
it's
agree
about
with you
in your
100%.
brain
That's
too.
that's exactly what it's about. You know what I mean? It's about like, again, for me, like I'm trying to push the limits and break ceilings, right? Like that's what it's about.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And you could be happy with sitting on the bench,
sure.
or we could keep pushing the limits, right? And doing what you know you could do. So at the end of the day, like you look back on your accomplishments, you look back on your life, whether it's your personal life or your professional life, and be like, hey, I did a good job.
I mean, I'm just gonna say one thing about that bench comment that you make. As somebody who
Mhm.
did ride the bench in high school basketball, like my job isn't to be the star. My job is to work the star so much that they get so frustrated that they get better. That's my job.
Okay,
Like,
that's
I
fair.
mean, so like this is backstory. Probably nobody cares. Like, I'm not very tall. I'm not very fast. I can't dribble very well. My shooting is mediocre at best. But the one thing that I do have is that I'm hyper competitive, and at like when it comes to competition, like I get very very into it.
Mhm.
So like I would have to guard like the best player on my team. solely because I knew I was going to piss him off constantly. And that puts him in a mindset where he needs to be like, he needs to learn how to act in those environments. Because if you're on a big stage or if you're playing against a good player, like, you're not going to be like sunshine and rainbows. You're going to be frustrated in more cases than not. So like,
Yeah.
I will say, like, us bench warmers, like, don't count us out. Like, we might not have the skills, but we'll outwork folks more than likely all the time. But anyway,
I'm,
that's my own personal issues that I just wanted to vent a little bit.
that's
Uh,
fine. That's fine. I
yeah,
mean, I'm not bench shaming anybody,
sure,
you
sure.
know,
All right.
because at the end of the day, like, and we can talk about this too, because could be another
Yeah,
interesting conversation.
yeah,
Like,
sure.
I believe strongly in like the composition of a team, right, and
Yeah,
the chemistry of a team. Again, regardless of whether we're talking about sports or software development teams or whatever, like team chemistry and composition are really important because, like you said, like everyone has to know their role. You know what I mean?
yep.
We all can't be the quarterback,
Mm-hmm.
right? We can't. It just doesn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? We all can't be the
Nope.
kicker. Like, but we all can have a position that we play. We can all play that position really well. You know what I mean? And it's when that composition comes together how we really start to click together as people. So the thing is, like, you just got to know what your position is, and now how could you be competitive in your position?
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Are you going to be on the bench? Maybe you'll be six man of the year.
maybe.
Nothing wrong with that. You got to come on the
Maybe
bench to be six man of the year.
they called
You
me
know
the
what I mean?
spark plug. They called me the spark plug.
Maybe that could be a thing in it too. Another thing too.
Yeah, sure.
What else? I'm looking in the chat again. I see. Oh, my buddy Richie's here. Shout out to Richie real quick. Says my daughter trains with former U.S. national team player Eddie Johnson during the summer. The kids in his program train 5 hours a day. Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah,
8-year-old kids training 5 hours a day. That's wild, bro.
that's what we were
But
talking. That's what we were talking about. Like, we were in that. That was in the middle of the conversation we were having about like how you can work your tail off, like, and it's just is what it is. Like, and I think, you know, you can work your entire life off to like swim the 200-meter backstroke at the Olympics, and you
mhm,
never make it, and you're like 25 and quote unquote washed up, right? Like,
yeah,
that happens in all sorts of different things. Like in tech, for instance, like, you know, maybe you go to MIT or you go to Caltech or you go to some other, like, hey, like, only the smart people go to this school, like, no dummies. And then, like, maybe you do an interview at Google or an interview at Microsoft and you don't do the interview well. Maybe you have anxiety. Maybe the person who's interviewing you didn't do well. And, like, you don't get that break. And
yeah,
then you're like, then what? And I'm not saying that like the goal should always be to work at the big tech company. Like, I think you and I both proved that we can enjoy our lives working at non-big tech companies. But at the end of the day, it's like there's other options out there for me other
yeah,
than just this thing that I've been working for a long time. And like that include that in that I'd like to get your thoughts too, like the amount of mental gymnastics or mental resilience that you need to have to do like overcoming that failure, right? Like, I'd imagine you've dealt with failure in your career and in your life, and like you like how do you handle those things? Like, how have you handled those things in the past, and like if you could change them, like not
yeah.
to like, you know, anyway, you know what I'm trying to
Yeah,
say.
that's a really good question. I like it because I like it, but then it's also very subjective. Like,
Sure.
I can tell people what I would do,
Yep.
but I think, as again going back to the psychology, right, like you kind of have to look in yourself and figure out for your personality trait, like what's going to be the best way for you to approach
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
situation. You know what I mean? And for me, like I learned to accept failure as a software developer, and I think we all kind of have to every day,
Every
even
day.
from a small perspective, because the first time you write code, like it's probably not going to work
Nope.
for most of us. You know what I mean? It's probably not going to work. Or the first time you deploy something, I'm sure you might have been up at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning deploying software in a previous life, and it's just like, oh, this is not working. We got to roll it back. Let's call this person. Let's call that person.
Yep.
Like that's failure. But then in those moments, like you still have to get the job done. You know what I mean? You don't like, oh my gosh, I failed, and you go in the corner and you cry.
Yep.
You know what I mean? You're like, okay, that didn't work out. Let's, what I mean, let's put on our big person pants
Yeah.
and try and figure it out. You know what I mean? And over time, like you have to develop a certain level of like resilience to dealing
Yeah.
with those things. And and then, I mean, that's just one example. I'll give you some other things that you know, resilience becomes like a very important part in just in terms of you progressing. Um, I'm a black person. In case folks didn't realize, I'm a black person. I I've done a lot of videos, and a lot of videos I've done are on YouTube.
Hmm.
And I do what people are not supposed to do, and I read the comments.
Okay.
Right? You're not supposed to read the comments. I read the comments. And people say some really nasty stuff about you sometimes,
Sure.
to be honest with you. And so in those moments, again, the psychology kicks in. In those moments, you got to be like, forget this, man. I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or whatever. Or you could take that energy and be like, you know what? I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
How do you make a better video? You make a
Hmm.
better video. You make a better video than that. You know what I mean? So for me, anytime like there's any type of like adversity,
Hmm.
any type of, failure or negative energy or anything like that, the way I handle it is I try and find a way to turn like that anxiety and that uncomfort into like positive energy.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, how can I use that as energy to push me further,
Yeah.
to do things better, to be more meticulous, to be stronger, faster, whatever that song is.
Sure. Yeah.
um, like how could we do those things, right? Because you know, there's some things aren't going to work out, but then
Sure.
how can I take this as an experience to just make myself better at the end of the day? And
Yeah.
again, if you're me, like I'm low key competitive, like I said, like I always want to get better. Like there's never a
Yeah.
part of me that's just like, oh, this is enough. Like I'll never say
Yeah.
that unless I'm like
Yeah.
eating or something. But I'm never gonna be like, oh, this is
Yeah.
enough, right? Like I'm always gonna want to do more. I'm gonna want to take another shot, right? Like I'm gonna want to, do another lap, right? I'm gonna want to, play another level on Assassin's Creed. I've been playing that a lot lately. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like I'm gonna want to try to do the things to reach my goals and complete it because you have that like competitive nature in your system. So regardless of whatever happens on the outside, like how can I take, me missing the shot, missing the goal, you know what I mean? Someone not liking something that I
Yeah.
said, or someone like, throwing negative energy just
Yeah.
because and not because I did anything wrong. Like how could I just take that as motivation to like just keep doing better?
I mean, that's awesome. Like, awesome. Like, I guess creed to live by, right? Like, there's this. Like, you're never going to beat the haters. Like, you never are. Like, you're never going to beat them. But what you can do is prove them wrong over and over and over again. Especially if you get to that level where you're visible enough. People are just going to say bad things about you no matter what.
Yeah.
And more than likely, you have more positive reviews than you have negative reviews. But you don't look at the positive reviews because the positive reviews just solidify what you already know, that you're doing good work. The negative reviews, back to my comment earlier about like that painfulness, right? Like some feedback is great, some feedback is absolutely terrible. And I assume that you're talking about feedback that is terrible and not helpful.
Yeah.
So what you do is you use that, like you said, as motivation to be like, you know what, fuck you, man. Like I'm going to do what I'm doing. People love it, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. And that's a great way to live by. Like that's something that I have a hard time with. Like I get a bit in my own head. My ego gets rocked. Like I go and cry in the corner, but I jump back up. Like I think at the end of the day, you can judge a person by their reactions to, I don't want to say failure, that's not the right word. Like any sort of obstacle.
Hmm.
Like you can judge people a lot by how they work around obstacles, right?
Right.
Like you get a bad review, you get fired, something happens
Yeah. Stuff
in your
happens.
personal
You get
life, right?
sick.
Like yeah, whatever,
Stuff
right? And how you overcome those obstacles is really a great way to gauge people. Um, because I only want to center myself around people that want to keep fighting. Like I joke with my wife all the time, like she is kind of like me, like very like I don't want to say aggressive because my wife's probably hearing me right now, but she can get very passionate about things. And
Yeah.
like that's the reason why I'm in the relationship.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, it's I want to surround myself with people that have like, to basketball again, like Mamba mentality, right? Like
Yeah.
I want to put myself around people that if I fell into a hole, they would get me out of that hole. or if they were down the hole with me, like they would get me out too. Like that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's like personal work, whatever, right? And we were talking about this a little bit off stream, but it's like you surround yourself with people that you enjoy working with. Like at the end of the day, because you can leave jobs, right? But you never like leave the people unless you don't like them.
Yeah.
Like, and the internet helps that. Like, you and I don't work together anymore, but we still chat occasionally.
Yeah.
Like, if we ever get a chance to be in person, like we'll go hang out. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
it's just one of those things. Like, you don't lose you don't lose friends when you leave jobs. What you do lose is
Yeah.
you leave bad situations. Whether it's a manager, whether it's a role, whether it's the work you're doing, doesn't matter, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's what's interesting.
Yeah. I've spoken to a lot of folks, particularly like since I just recently transitioned to a different job at a different company,
Sure.
you know, other people that had that same mindset like kind of come out the woodworks and they're like, oh, I was thinking about
Yeah.
doing something similar.
Sure.
Could you share your experience and your perspective? And I would tell you there's a lot of folks out there that are honestly just afraid, right? Like
Yeah.
psychologically afraid. And the fear comes from just thinking, I'm not good enough, I'm making a bad choice or decision,
Yeah.
what if something happens, and like there's all of these things that are there, and those are valid concerns, you know what I mean? But then there's also the concern of, well, what happens if it's great?
Yeah.
Why did you even want to have this thought in the first place? Like, why
Yeah.
did you think about doing something different in the first place? Like, what about your day to day is not being satisfied or
Sure.
respected or fulfilled, right? Like let's answer that question, and then now as you're trying to make another decision, let's look and try and find positions that you could be in, environments that you could be in, that can help you satisfy whatever your career goal is. You know
Yep.
what I mean? And I'll tell you, for me, I'll be very clear about this, very honest about this. One of the things that I was afraid of was, after you have tenure, when you're in
Sure.
somewhere for 4 or 5 years and you have internal rapport and respect from people,
Mm-hmm.
you're like, do I really want to go and be like the new person
Yeah.
again at another
Yeah.
place?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I want to do that. You know what I mean? But then, but then what else is there, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I could stay for my friends, or I could go and take care of my family, and I could still have my friends. We could
Yeah.
still hang out.
Yeah.
But if I leave and you don't want to talk to him anymore, then you know what? I'll just call that a purge. Like, I've just
Yeah.
purged some things out of my system that I probably shouldn't have had there in the first place.
Like
You
yeah,
know?
you said something interesting about like risk in that, right? Like it's okay to be risk adverse. Like especially when you have new opportunities. But what I think
Yeah.
a lot of people don't ever think about is you can like be you need to be risk adverse for your current situation. Like what happens in the situation, like if I stay, like I'm just taking work for an example because we're talking about
Yeah.
work. What if I'm in this job and then, something happens related to my job that I don't like anymore? That's always a risk, especially when you work in tech. Like you just get reworked like nobody's business. Like
Hmm.
you if you don't if you continue to sit and I guess marinate in your situation,
Yeah.
you risk the opportunity of something bad happening. And I'm not to say like don't always like grass is always greener. Like grass is always greener is probably never accurate, right?
Yeah.
But it's everything's a calculated risk. Like shit, waking up in the morning is a calculated risk, right? Like I'm in my 30s, like I might hurt my back every day. Like
Yeah.
it's just one of those things where you need to kind of weigh all of your options. And if you have more pros than cons, like that's the option to take every single time. Like and I think, one of the things that people guess get really hung up on is like that back to this conversation we had a while ago about like being uncomfortable. Some people just don't want to be uncomfortable, and that's
Yeah.
okay. Totally cool to be if you don't like being uncomfortable. But if you're not uncomfortable, then what are you actually doing?
Yeah. It's like,
And yeah,
no, it's like people are afraid about things that aren't normal to them, right?
yep,
I'll give you an example. Like my mother lives in the Caribbean. I do not live in
mm-hmm,
the Caribbean. And so my mother has to fly on a plane
yep,
to come to where I live. That sounds normal to most people.
sure,
My mother does not like being on airplanes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That is like a psychologically distressing thing for her to do. She does
Mm.
it because not just me, but we have family members that live in various parts of the world. So she goes on a plane to see family. Being on a plane is a distressing thing for her and is not something that she does every day.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Me now, I was in a position where I was on a plane like every other week.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I looked at the plane, I was just like, like it's whatever. Like I don't think about it. But because what's normal for me, like my habitual way of living is
Hmm.
different. You know what I mean? And so now again, if we relate that back to what we're talking about when it comes to like what we want from our jobs and from work and anything else that we're afraid of these things because well, it's not normal for us to think that way, or not normal for us to put ourselves in a position to have those types of conversations. You know what I mean? I'm like, when my mom comes and visits, and I'm on the highway, and I'm trying not to incriminate myself, and
Uh-oh.
I'm doing 85 miles an hour
Oh,
going down
that's
the highway.
exactly 10 miles an hour. It's okay. Speed guns don't detect differences in
I'm
10.
doing
Yep,
85
I
down
got
the
you. I
highway.
got you. I got you.
My mother freaks out. She's like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
And I'm just like, "Do you realize everyone else is going faster than I
Yeah.
am?"
Well, so
You
that's a
know?
whole different thing, right? Like you have to assume some risk
Yeah.
if literally everybody like if it's risky like in that situation if it's risky to slow down, don't
Mhm.
slow down, because the last thing I want to do is be going the speed limit when everybody else is not going the speed limit and I get rear-ended. Like
Right.
even though like it's not my fault, whatever, like I don't want to get into a car accident, so I'm going to put
That's true.
myself in a position where I don't get into a car accident. I mean,
Right.
and I know that that's not a lot of people think like that, but at the same time,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you're like this, but I'm just gonna like enter into Isaac's brain. My brain
Mhm.
needs to be like lit up at all times,
Mhm.
right? Like if my brain is like just chilling, like not being fired up by work or life or hobbies or whatever, like I tend to just kind of get into my own head and I don't want to say get depressed, but just not happy. And how do I fix that? Like I'm always like I work out every day. Like I try to play with my kids as much as possible. Like I'm always trying to like some side project in development or like trying to work on stuff. Like, I'm always trying to do stuff because I figured out that my brain works best if it's literally on fire all the time. And
Yeah.
that's not for everybody. But at the end of the day, like the alternative is me just being a bummer. Like and I take it out on everybody because I just get in my own head, right?
Yeah. And it's good that you can have that like level of self reflection and
Yeah.
understanding for you, like that's what you need to be at your best.
Yep.
See what I'm saying? Like for people watching, people at home, people are listening, everyone is gonna have like their unique combination of things that they need to put together to figure out well how best did they function and operate. And like what's their comfortable space, you know what I mean? But the thing too is like even if you find your comfortable space, you know what I mean? You got to figure out, well, am I just going to stay here or am I going to
Yep.
continuously try to improve a little bit
Yes.
and do something different? You know what I mean? Yes, I'm good at my job. Yes, I do these things, but maybe I want a little bit more responsibility. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I want a little bit more fulfillment. You know what I mean? But it might be scary for me to leave this comfortable position in this comfortable spot in this comfortable team with these teammates that are my friends and I know their spouses and their kids and their dogs' names
Yeah.
to go into a new place and doing something different with a team that I'm completely unfamiliar with. And now I'm freaking out.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I know I could do a good job, but just the fact that, I'm changing the variables a little bit, my brain is freaking out. You know what I mean? And again, it kind of goes down to what type of person are you, right? Like how can we take that anxiety and that uncomfortable energy and try and turn it into something positive?
That's spot on. And I'm gonna stop talking because we're running out of time. But I just want to say one more thing.
Oh, are we?
Like,
Oh,
so it's already been an hour. Like that's the whole thing. Like these
that's
conversations are great, but I can keep talking for a little bit if you can keep talking. Um, like I'm coining it right now. Anybody who watches this or listens to this podcast later, DevOps your life. If it hasn't already been coined, it's like continuous integration, continuous delivery of your life, right? Like this idea of like constantly evolving and constantly shipping a new version of yourself, right? I literally just thought of that. It's probably already been thought about 1,000 times, but if it
I'm going to
hasn't,
look it up right now.
I'm gonna do a talk on it. I'm gonna uh, I'm gonna do all the things. So you heard it here, and it is 12:10 Pacific on March 10th, 2022. If anybody comes up with this idea after me, I trademarked it right here. Don't do it. But I mean, to not like to stop kidding, like this idea of like, I think you and I are very similar, constantly evolving, constant reflection, self-awareness, situational awareness. Might not be the best practitioners of these things, but it's about that awareness level
Yeah.
and attaching yourself to some framework like, DevOps, good, bad, or indifferent. Like, is that framework that I think works good for me? Um, and if I'm able to make changes, then ship a new version of myself, there's probably going to be some bugs in it, more than likely. And I think at the end of the day, we need to be okay with there being flaws in our character if we have intention to fix them in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Right?
agree with that. I agree with that. Especially the part where you're talking about like there being flaws. I think the
Yep.
important part to that point is recognizing the flaw. Because sometimes that's a hard thing for people to do. Like I acknowledge that these things are wrong with me. You know what I mean? Okay, and now that I've acknowledged that fact, what can be done to like solve that problem? You know what I mean? That is the hard part. Like the self-awareness of saying like this is a problem. This is a personal problem. You know what I mean? And it's affecting me and other people around me. How can we make this a better situation?
Yeah, I jokingly say that I have great self and situational awareness. I just don't practice it very well. Like that's my thing. Like
Yeah.
I've caught myself in many situations being like, Isaac, you shouldn't be doing this right now. Like, Isaac, this is gonna end
Now's
up
not the time.
this is
Let's
gonna
not do it.
end poorly for you.
Mm.
And I do it anyway because I'm like, shut up thing in my brain that's trying to rationalize with me. I want to do this right now. Like I
Right.
know I haven't tested this code, or I'm gonna have that extra slice of pizza, or I'm gonna go to bed too late, like whatever. Like I don't listen to like the good thing on your shoulder. I very much am motivated by the bad thing on my shoulder telling me that it's gonna feel better, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but like if you can put yourself in situations where all the decisions you make have a very, very clear positive outcome or negative outcome, you can choose better. I know that life isn't like that. Life is very gray.
Yeah.
But it's really, really important for us. And maybe this is just the analytic person in me. It's like, how do you analyze these situations in ways to only positively benefit you and the people around you? And I told you, man, I'd like psychology thing, like you're interested in it, I'm interested in it. Like this conversation went completely in this direction and I'm loving it.
Yeah, this is a great conversation, man. You know, if folks in the chat are interested, we could do this again in another couple of weeks
I
if
mean, I
folks are
would
interested in hearing some
like.
more.
I mean, Cecil, I think this is our time. Let's do. I know our friend Brian Clark talks about mental health and all these sort of things in tech too.
Yeah.
Like, maybe we should figure out something. Like, because I think that there is a ton of interest in people like hearing other people's. What's the word to think of? Like ways people handle adversity, way they mitigate risk, and a lot of people like us, we have similar mindsets. We think the same way about things, right? Because
Yeah.
honestly, we're in tech, and a lot of people in tech, unfortunately, think the same way. Um,
They,
but I
they do.
mean, it's one of those things where I just love chatting with folks, and I want to be mindful of your times, but I want to thank you for coming on and chatting with me just about all sorts of great stuff. I like we're friends. I've learned a lot about you today that I didn't know, and I think that it's awesome when we have these opportunities to catch up and chat with people that we have mutual respect for.
For sure, man. Like I said, appreciate it. I'm a fan of the show. I've seen a couple of these before,
Yeah,
and yeah, if you want, maybe later on, maybe you, me, Brian, and we grab a couple other folks, and I don't know, let's do a panel or something like that. Like that
yeah,
could be
that would be
fun.
cool. That'd be cool. And so if you've seen the show, so you know that I got one last question for you. So
Yep.
at the end of our chats, I always like to ask the guests, if you can think of tech, open source, the community around it, like what's the one word that comes to mind for you?
What's the one word? It's possibilities.
Possibilities.
Possibilities is my word. I find like technology has given me option and the possibilities to feed my family, to exercise my creative juices, to teach other people things. and even affected other parts of my life too to just be more efficient, right? So it's just so much possibility, right? And even if we go back to like that comment I made about like the folks in the Caribbean and how they use technology to do things to save lives. You know what I mean? Like just imagine like what would have happened otherwise. You know what I mean? So there's just so much possibility in tech, and so much more that we haven't even realized yet. So it's really just exciting spot to be in right now.
I totally agree. I mean, and I think with that, I want to thank you, Cecil, for your time. For folks who aren't following Cecil, please do. Cecil Phillip on Twitter. He's all over the place, doing great things at Stripe, doing great things in the .NET community. So, yeah, Cecil, thank you again so much. Do you have any last words or parting things to say?
No, I mean, thank you everyone that's still here that listened to
Yeah,
me and Isaac chop it up for the past hour and a little bit. And yeah, anytime I'm very like non-aggressive on Twitter, I promise. So feel free to reach out, send me a DM or message if there's anything you wanted to know or anything you want to ask about. Um, and maybe we could connect on Twitch or YouTube or
yeah,
something else in some other time.
yeah. Awesome. So, thanks everybody for tuning in and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Bye, folks.